We have a price target in 2030 for Bitcoin of more than $1 million per Bitcoin. Who is behind Bitcoin? At MIT, certainly that was the case. And, the SEC has declared, as we all know, that Bitcoin is not a security. Now, Gary Gensler is talking pretty aggressively about everything else out there being a security. So I think this has elevated Bitcoin from a risk point of view, not to a lower risk. I shouldn't say elevated. It's actually lowered the risk that it's so clear Bitcoin is not a security, and everything else, at least in Chairman Gensler's eyes, is. Yes. Michael and I had a very spirited discussion yesterday afternoon about inflation as an issue, or is it ultimately going to go away? And we don't agree on everything, but one thing that I know and that we agree on is that if inflation is an issue, clearly Bitcoin is a great hedge against inflation. When we look at the deflationary impact of the various technologies around which we have centered our research, we think longer-term deflation and creative destruction associated with disruptive innovation, that's the bigger risk. And when you think about Bitcoin in those terms, you're thinking about a hedge against counterparty risk. So if we're going to have this debt deflationary bust that some still worry about out there, you've got Bitcoin as a hedge against that. So, it's, as an investor, whenever I hear win-win, I usually don't believe it. But as it is very interesting to watch the equity markets, or the investors in equity markets, treating Bitcoin and other crypto assets like they are treating the rest of tech, which is not very well of late. And to see the holding behavior in the Bitcoin community, I think, is it 70% of the Bitcoin outstanding, so roughly 13.5 million units of the 19 are in long-term holding hands, so more than 6 months. So the community gets it, and my fellow investors will get it with time, but in the meantime, it's going to be a very nice ride. I think the most interesting thing that's happened, and we met someone from Mississippi, I think a congressman from Mississippi, and I'm seeing the politics around Bitcoin changing radically because it has become, the single issue that some people are voting on, and this is bipartisan. And even where we've moved in St. Pete, because people know that I'm very Bitcoin focused, the politicians have come to me and said, I want to pull together a room of Bitcoin enthusiasts, and I really want to learn from them what they want from us. Think about that. Think about that. That is a radical shift over the last few years. The other thing that I see, so a year ago, roughly, when Janet Yellen was appointed Treasury Secretary, I remember her first comments about Bitcoin were money laundering, nefarious characters, environmentally damaging. And then 2 weeks ago, someone's whispering in her ear, and we talked about this, you think it might be Gary Gensler. There is someone whispering in the ears of politicians, if you want to lose, if you want the U.S. to lose out on this, one of the most amazing innovation platforms of all times, you keep talking like that. So she has changed her tune. So I'm very positive here. And of course, we're meeting people from around the world, just met from Honduras, Mexico. I think the movement is spreading pretty quickly now.
Cathie, what do you think about technology trends that are going to impact Bitcoin?
Well, I agree with you on the Lightning Network. I was fascinated. We were studying the announcement this morning, And there's so much friction, there has been so much friction involved in the process that taking away some of that friction, whether it's direct deposit, you can put 2% of your paycheck into Bitcoin, or the idea that I don't need to know whether I'm on the Lightning Network or on the base layer. I can transact. I can become a part of this community and not have the friction. I think they're pulling a lot of the difficulty, complexity out. I've watched the number of Lightning channels. They're up to 84 to 90,000. That's nearly a triple over the last year. That's probably because of El Salvador. With this announcement, I think the number of channels is going to explode. The liquidity, we think, is going to go from, and I should say we, in the audience, we have Yassine Elmandra and Frank Downing, my secret weapons in terms of Bitcoin and everything crypto, for example. But we think that the liquidity, which has gone up tenfold in dollars, fourfold in Bitcoin over the last year, that's just a taste of what's going to happen now that Cash App is going to make this, make it so much easier to use the Lightning Network. And I also say follow the developers. I think we're going to see an explosion of developers focused on the Lightning Network. And so now I think this has been the missing link in terms of the use case. Store of value, yes, it's always been there. Means of exchange and unit of account now have a much better opportunity for Bitcoin to dominate long term. I often, when we're trying to impress upon investors how important this movement is, what I usually say is, okay, listen to this and listen to every word, because every word is important. Bitcoin is the first global. That's really important, as Michael said. Private. Now, it's open source, but there's no government involvement. So private. So first, global, private, digital, rules-based monetary system in the history of the world. It is a very big idea.
I'm interested in your perspective as an investor. How do you see the capital markets and their attitude toward Bitcoin today versus a year or 2 years ago?
Well, it's improved, but it's a long way from, being fully accepted, embraced, and so forth. What we're seeing with Bitcoin and traditional institutional investors is the same thing ARK is seeing about all of our strategies, associated with all of our strategies. They're very volatile. That's scary for institutional investors. There's no index. They're not in my index. So, this would be very risky to get involved. This is a new asset class, and we don't even know what the regulations are. So we're seeing a lot of pushback still that way. But as many of you may know, in our Big Ideas 2022, which is at ark-invest.com, we have a price target in 2030 for Bitcoin of more than $1 million per Bitcoin. And yeah, see, even you can't believe it. I expected a big roaring no, but and if you go in and you'll see how we build that case, we see institutional investors, all we expect over the next 8 years is that 2.5%, roughly 2.5% of assets, institutional assets, are allocated to Bitcoin. So we don't need a lot. And if it's more than that, and that's how institutional investors work, they tiptoe in. In the 70s, it was real estate. In the 80s, it was emerging markets, 80s and 90s. And now I think it's going to be crypto, starting with Bitcoin. And that's very important, starting with Bitcoin, because they understand what it is and what it's not. It's not a security.